tab is how many is in the total event.
I see. So we're doing pretty well. We have 36 people, I think, and I see a list of quite a few people. And I guess this is Colin, feel free to jump in and correct me if I say anything that's incorrect, but this is a one-way street right now for me talking. I'm not sure what the mechanism is for other people to join in and to speak or to write comments, but I think the CAD business meeting, it's fairly relaxed. So whatever mechanism somebody, and Danielle, I see you're on as well, if you can let us know how somebody can just join in with some comments or a question as we go through the business meeting. I'm sure people would appreciate that.
Yeah, at least based off of other sessions, the main way to have others contribute is through the chat. But Danielle, I don't know if there's a way to add people so they can speak. But the chat is, I think, the most reliable.
You can work with the chat, or if you can figure out a way to let people chime in with their voice, that'd be fine too. But I'll give it, well, we're at 12:02, so why don't we just give it another minute and we'll start. Let's scroll down through the list and see everybody who's joined us. Hi, Sarah. I see you're.
Hello. I figured I'd share too, just in case, so I can talk some during the business meeting.
Right. And I think any of the committee members who want to join, and it looks like, Sarah, you were just able to do that. I don't know if you had the request to be able to speak or show your video. All right, well, let's go and get started then. Maybe I won't wait a whole minute. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the business meeting. It seems like we have actually better turnout at this business meeting than we may have at the in-person PA meeting, which is great. Maybe it's the business meeting, maybe it's Colin's session afterwards, which seems very interesting. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave right around 12:30, have another meeting. Of course, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason Devine. I'm the chair of the Committee for Applied Demography for PA, and I work at the Census Bureau, and we are, of course, very busy right now with 2020 Census Data Review. As I go through, I have a kind of a presentation, kind of just notes. I mean, the business meeting is somewhat informal, but it's also the business meeting, so it's, we like to make some progress on things that we need to get done throughout the year. And usually, the business meeting has, it's a chance for us to sort of meet in person and talk to each other in person, and to see those at PA who are also interested in applied demography, who show up at the applied demography meeting, to kind of just be to discuss the business of the CAD. But of course, we're all doing things virtually now. So we've been having a lot of meetings outside of this virtually. So we've had a lot more, I think, probably communication than typically we would outside of the meetings. But of course, this applied demography meeting, supported by PA, is a unique opportunity for us as part of the applied demography community. But since we might have some new people who are not that familiar with how this works with the Committee for Applied Demography, I thought I would say first a little bit about what this committee does, kind of to give everybody an introduction to this group. So the Applied Demography Committee, and you can read the screen along with me, it represents the activities, interests, and perspectives of the business demography and state and local demography interest groups to the PAA board. The committee helps facilitate the organizing of sessions at the annual meetings and annually sponsors the Applied Demography Breakfast. The committee shall be composed of 6 members, including the chair. The term of the chair will be 4 years, and the other 5 members shall serve 3-year terms on a rotating basis, with an option for a second 3-year term. All terms will pertain to a calendar year, and the chair or his or her designee will also advise the program committee for their annual meetings each year. That's kind of the summary. Basically, what we do is we try to work with PA leadership to help represent the interest of applied demographers as part of PA. And as I'm sure all of you know, because you're at this conference, we're very excited to be putting on this conference. And Sarah has been doing a great job, along with Danielle and Colin and others, to help plan for this conference and pull it off in a virtual format. The idea for this applied demography conference started years ago, and we thought maybe we could use last PA to kind of, I don't know, create some excitement around it and talk about it in person at these different opportunities we would have in person at the PA meeting. But of course, that didn't happen. So we're excited to, even without that, to have, I think, what seems to be so far to be a very successful meeting. I've been on some of the sessions, and all very interesting, very applied work. So it's a little bit about applied demography and what we do. So let me go to the next slide. So let me just take a second to acknowledge and mention who the committee members are. And of course, as I just said, the committee members serve on a term that lasts a few years, and then they rotate, then we continue with another term, or they rotate and we bring somebody else onto the committee. So this is an opportunity for anybody who's looking to be more interested and kind of learn about how PA works, kind of behind the scenes, and how the interests of applied demographers get represented within PA. So committee members currently are myself, Jason Devine, Susan Brower, who actually is not a committee member anymore. She left at the end of this last year, but she's been very active both in helping with this meeting as well as planning sessions for the upcoming PA full meeting. Matthew Hauer, Malia Jones, Colin McCarter, Sarah Burgoyne, and then I also want to mention two people who help us that are part of PA leadership. That's Danielle Stout, who you all probably know by now, and Betsy Paganos. Both have been extremely helpful with this committee and the work that we do. And I will say, as I became chair a few years ago, Danielle and other members of PA leadership approached me and sort of made a commitment to try and do more with the applied demography group to represent the needs of applied demographers in PA. And I really do think they've delivered on that. And I'll go over some of those things in the next few slides. But I also leave plenty of time for us just to, well, now that I think about it, we won't have much time for discussion because we can't really discuss, but I'll be looking for your comments in the comment section. So if you do have comments or questions, feel free to add them there.
And on that note, Jason, I did get confirmation from Danielle. If anyone on the session would like to speak, you just have to request to share your audio or video, and Danielle will accept you and you'll have that opportunity. So there is chance for feedback.
Great. So by all means, if you want to do that, feel free. And then Colin, I'm looking at the list of people now, and I know many of you, so great to see you here. All right. So one of the things that the Committee for Applied Demography does is we work with PA to have sessions to work with the program committee, PA program committee, to propose sessions. One of the things we do at our business meeting is we talk about ideas for sessions, and I think we may talk about that a little bit today, but I think we will also try and have a business meeting at the full PA conference, and then we'll talk about ideas for sessions, both standard sessions as well as invited sessions. So I just wanted to mention here some of the sessions we were able to have on the agenda for the full PA meeting. Colin will be leading a session, an invited session on open source demography. Susan will be coordinating a session on assessing the quality of the 2020 census. And I believe we again have Ron Jarman here to talk at this session. And something that will be different at this session, or hopefully will be different at this session, is some of those first census data, as well as some of those quality metrics that Ron mentioned will have been released at that point. And then we have a number of other regular sessions. There was a redistricting session, which I'm not sure if it's going to work out because of the timing of the release of the census data. Didn't really give them much to talk about, so that might not have had the sort of participation that we would like to have. So I don't know if that session is still going to go on. It's a session on estimates and projections, which has kind of always been a kind of a staple of the sessions that we put forward for PA. Session on estimating environmental related population change, session on community-based demography, and a last session on data visualizations in applied demography. So I don't think the PA program is available yet, but we should see, I would expect to see these sessions also show up on that program. but you just don't know because it also, I think, depends on papers that are submitted to those sessions. So I want to thank Susan because she was a committee member and now she's off. So I want to thank her for her time on the committee. Fortunately, because we're not in person, I can't present you a small plaque or a token of our appreciation, but I'll work with Danielle to see how we can, going forward, do something to acknowledge people's contributions. I also want to thank Danielle for all of her efforts working with us. And when we started a few years ago working with Danielle, it was one of the challenges with the committee was always kind of coming on and only being on the committee for a few years and learning all you needed to learn to sort of make the best represent applied demographers on the committee. And then there was kind of more of a business side of it, you know, the funds that were available to host things such as the breakfast and other things. And just knowing how to work with the PA leadership, having her to help with this has been tremendous for the, I think, progress of the group. She's also helped organize a lot of the meetings and the calls that we've had between our meetings associated with the conferences. So that I think has been a nice addition to our work and has really helped us kind of move some of the priorities of the group forward, such as this excellent conference that we're all at right now. And I also want to thank Alexis Santos-Lozada. He was working on the Applied Demography newsletter, and he put out a special, as well as being editor of that newsletter for a number of years. He worked on a special COVID edition of the newsletter, which I'm told has received a lot of attention, and was able to put some really good demography out there for people to consume. That's one of the things I'm going to mention in a few minutes, is that's one of the things that we want to talk to everybody a little bit about today. I also wanted to thank the committee members. I think we've had a very productive few years, and I'll go over some of those things that I think represent progress with the group, the next bullets. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating remotely during the pandemic. Thank you for participating with us. Thank you for being so active in helping formulate sessions. Thank you, Sarah, and others for being so active in helping plan this conference. I had to kind of withdraw my efforts a little bit because of all the work with the decennial census, but I think they did a great job sort of continuing and moving the work of the community forward. All right, so let me go over some of the things I think represent progress for the group. Of course, this conference, we worked with Danielle and others to put together this conference, and it was just, I think, a great experience. We all were a little sort of had some concerns when we first started thinking about this conference. Of course, with us all, having day jobs and other things that we're involved in, one of the things that we try to do as part of this committee is keep our sort of commitment, keep the commitment that's necessary to keep progress going forward to sort of a minimum, I guess. And I think we were successful with that. We really were worried about how much this was going to take to put this conference together. I don't know, Sarah, I'm sure you probably put a lot into this, but we were able to go forward and plan this conference with Danielle and others' help with, what you'd expect level of involvement, but it wasn't overly burdensome. So I'll say that for anybody who's looking to become more involved with this group, that you can be involved and you can still, the commitment that we ask from each person who serves in the committee is somewhat minimal, but I think enough to keep things moving forward. So one of the things that, when I started as chair, one of the things I kind of had developed over the years is there was this real sort of uncertainty and confusion about how, every year we would have the annual meeting and we would meet with other applied demographers and we would talk about ideas for sessions, and we would come up with some really great ideas, and then we would propose them back to PA or provide them back to the PA leadership. And sometimes the sessions didn't make it. Sometimes our ideas for invited sessions didn't make it. Sometimes they did, so it was kind of confusing. It wasn't clear what was going on, why there wasn't this clear, one of the key purposes of this group was to propose applied demography sessions for PA and then get those on the agenda. And it was sort of a source of confusion, trying to figure out why that wasn't working kind of the way we thought it should. And I think what we came to understand was PA has both committees, such as the Applied Demography Committee, but they also have a PA program committee every year that comes together and comes up with ideas for sessions. And I think that program committee plays a big role in what makes it onto the agenda. And depending on the members of that program committee and their understanding of how the Committee for Applied Demography works with PA to provide topics, it would vary from year to year to the consideration that the PA program committee would make, for those sessions that were put together and proposed by the Committee for Applied Demography. So one of the changes that we made, which I think is a great improvement and will really help get more applied demography sessions on the full conference agenda, was there will now be a member of the Committee for Applied Demography on the program committee to work with the specific part of that committee that looks at applied demography, to represent some of the topics that the Applied Demography Committee proposed. So that should help make sure that the ideas that this group comes up with and brings to the PA leadership, if those don't get lost, if those get carried forward in the discussions about the development of the PA program. So pretty excited about that. And I think we've seen the results of having myself on the program committee for this upcoming PA meeting, and some of the sessions that we're able to get on that program. And many of you have probably noticed, if you recently gone in to register for your PA, renew your PA membership, there's kind of a new format, and it's online, and you can go and you can apply, and it's a little bit easier to select that you want to make that contribution, that $5 contribution, to be considered part of the PA's Applied Demography group. So we've seen, I think, a pretty substantial uptick in the number of people who are doing that. I don't have the numbers. Maybe Danielle can jump in a few seconds and let us know kind of how many people have been registering for that. But I think we've seen an increase in that, and that's kind of worked through another one of the little sort of kinks that we had in the process, in that it always wasn't, a lot of people may have wanted to make that step, but it wasn't always clear as they were registering how to do that. And again, I want to mention this special COVID-19 issue of applied demography that Alexis put together. That was a great effort, and really good work with that issue of the applied demography newsletter. But I think that kind of brings me to one of the last areas where we wanted to get ideas on. And as we worked through these different things, if you think about it, it was, this conference was new. This was something we wanted to work through and see to fruition. The figuring out the topics that make it to the PA program, that was another thing we wanted to work on. The registration for for applied demography, we wanted to work on that. And the final thing that we've had a few meetings, and we've kind of had some false starts with, and we're kind of wondering where do we go next with this, and keeping in mind kind of what we're all able to commit to this effort. Where do we go next with this idea of an applied demography newsletter? So I would like to get ideas and hear what people think about that, or maybe they can type in the chat window, or they can join in and speak. But that's something that I think going forward over the next year, the committee is going to focus on a little bit and try and make some progress on. All right, so thank you. Those are the items I wanted to cover. So now we can open it up for general conversation. Maybe this virtual arrangement won't lend itself too well for open discussion about topics, but let's see how it goes. And before I go into that, though, Sarah, do you want to say anything else about the conference? It seems like it's been going great.
Yeah, I think it's been going really great. I guess I can share my video so it's less awkward.
Let me stop sharing as well so you get the full screen.
Okay. Hello. So no, I think the conference has been going really great. I really appreciate everyone sort of taking on this new technology. I guess one of the things I'd really love is feedback for like how frequently people think we should have this conference. I know in the past, the Applied Demography conferences have been every other year. I don't know if we should try keeping the same cadence. Certainly, I'm hoping the next Applied Demography conference will be in person, but maybe because technology can facilitate this, maybe it's something where we do online one year and in person the next. I don't really know, but I'd love to get feedback from people for that, if they'd like to, share their audio and speak, where you can type in the chat box, or Danielle's email this morning said there would be a survey to give feedback, so that would be another opportunity. And if people have ideas for sessions for following applied demography conferences, we can keep a record of all of those. So really, just any input people would like to give, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think people can put it in the chat, or they can speak. Or I will say that we had some really good locations, I think, identified when we were talking about in-person meetings. Smaller cities, smaller places than you might see with the full PA meeting, but nice places.
Yes, warm locations for this time of year.
I know many of the people on the list of people. I know many of you like to provide input, so feel free. This is your opportunity. Or if you want to comment on the conference, anything. But I will try and sort of end this at 12:30, so we can give Alan full time for his session. Alexandra, how you doing?
Really good. Yeah, I had one piece of feedback. I really like the hop-in platform. I really like the network feature because you might get matched with somebody that you might not have otherwise gotten to spoken to if you were in person. So when we do go in person, that might be one thing to think about, like how can you bridge network opportunities and like opportunities for mentoring, because usually sometimes you kind of flock towards the same type of people or people, and so that was a great way to get like more kind of like diverse random people to match with.
And when we were talking about kind of the things we wanted this conference to include, like that idea of networking, more in the way of training, more in the way of job sort of sharing of job opportunities, and then applied sessions. And those were the ingredients that we thought would make a great applied demography conference. So those were the things that we wanted to see. And I think if it would have been in person, you might have seen those a little bit more, in the format we used to. But with this other, you're right though, this hop-in platform works really well, and networking was kind of fun.
Yeah, and
I was just going to say, I think previously Danielle had maybe at an in-person conference, we could have this sort of speed dating style networking. And we were all like, no, that's a horrible idea. We don't want to talk to other people. But I think because we were sort of forced into it this time, it worked out really well. So, maybe we can do something like that in person, at least for, maybe 30 minutes. So people get to talk to those that they wouldn't typically seek out on their own.
Yeah, and then like similarly, I think a few other conferences do this, but before they tend to do a mentoring program. So you match somebody with a mentor, and then during the conference, you just find a little bit of time to meet, which I think is a great opportunity for those who are still in school or early in their career to get mentored with somebody and make that lasting connection.
Yeah, I think looking at the names, on the right, I mean, this group would be a great group to match some of the more senior applied demographers up with people who are newer to the field.
So there are comments in the chat about next year being a good year to have potentially another applied demography conference, because all of the 2020 data will have released by then, and there will have been sufficient time for people to have analyzed those data. So certainly the committee can talk about that and speak with Danielle and the PA staff and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, I think we could do one, especially with this around the census time, one every year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why we can do this meeting every year anyway, just make it an annual meeting. But we'll talk to PA about that. And we had seen sort of an increase in the support from PA for things like the applied demography breakfast and other mixers that we typically have in person. We had some big plans until the PA went virtual last year. But going forward, when we're back in person, we'll definitely keep those, as well as look for other ways to keep things going in person.
So one thought I just had about the newsletter is, what if the newsletter was a summary of some of the presentations or expos from the conference? I don't know if there's any feelings about that, but that would have the material, and the newsletter would be kind of like a conference recap.
Yeah, I think that's, and there have been other applied demography conferences where they've turned some of the the presentations and proceedings from the conference. We could explore that as an option and sort of really build on this conference as a way to further the work of applied demography. But we also don't want to, one of the things that also we talked a lot about is we still want to keep a strong presence at the full PA meeting when it comes to applied demography topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, was that you volunteering to help put together some of the summaries?
I can volunteer to delegate.
That's the idea of, and we have kind of the, with, Alexa's no longer able to sort of be the editor of the newsletter. I think we kind of have an opportunity to sort of think about what form that newsletter takes going forward, whether it's an opportunity to sort of a platform for some of the work that's been done at this conference, whether it's something that's more virtual with more kind of information like job opportunities or things like, those are all updates on some of the colleagues we work with. And just ideas like that, I think, is something we need to think about, like how we want, and that's the kind of going forward. Those are the sort of the focus of this committee, of trying to think about what we do with that kind of hole in what we had been doing and how we make it. Now I think will be kind of the complete package for the applied demography committee. We will have this great applied demography conference. We'll have worked out the kind of a smoother process for getting applied demography topics on the PA agenda. We'll improve the way people can sign up so we get a really good read on the number of people who apply for, who are members of PA that are interested in applied demography. And then, we'll work on the newsletter.
Yeah, I think one other thing I just want to mention, Jason, is that for people that don't typically attend the CAD meeting at the regular conference, when we do that, that is really where we generate the session ideas for the following year. So, anyone that wants to join us in a couple months for that meeting, we'd be happy to have you and your ideas.
Yeah, those are really great. The ones I've been going to them for a number of years now. They're really great opportunities for discussion about what the hot topics are and what would make for good sessions. And this is a great opportunity to come and give your input and see some of that input reflected on the PA program. But this is, it's open. I can't stress that enough. That when we have like this meeting and the meeting at PA, it's open for anybody who wants to attend. Come, bring your friends, provide your input. And then, throughout the year, we work as a committee to get those ideas on the committee, then also work with some of the other great events that the applied demography, that PA does for applied demographers. Got one more minute. I'll see if anybody else wants to add anything. And, now that we're doing, we have this virtual conference, we can, something we really haven't done before, but people can always send their thoughts or their ideas, myself or Danielle or any way they can to get that information to us as far as input, and we will consider it when we have our when the committee meets and discusses ideas. All right. Well, I'm going to bow out, turn it over to Colin. I think I'll keep the screen open because I think I'm listed as the moderator, but I got to turn my attention back to some of the decennial work. But thank you, everybody, for coming. Sorry we could have had more of a interactive discussion with you, but maybe not this next full PA, but I'm sure before long we'll be back having in-person meetings and we can see each other face to face and talk more about applied demography. So thank you. I will talk to everybody later.
Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm almost afraid to leave. I'm not sure if I push leave, if it will do anything for the whole session. So maybe I'll just turn my camera and microphone off for now.
All right. So I will start sharing my screen. Hopefully you all can see. All right. All right. So, hello everyone. Colin McCarter here. I choose my titles kind of randomly depending on who I'm talking to, but can fall under demographer, data scientist bucket. I work for a company called Trellance, and they provide analytics for credit unions, analytics in a very broad sense. And I'm going to be talking about comparing data sources. This is kind of an introductory material, and definitely looking for any feedback or critiques in the chat. So with that in mind, we can just jump right in. So the background for what I was going to talk about today is that as applied demographers, we're tasked in all kinds of different settings to evaluate data sources and make professional judgments on trade-offs that we find within those data sources through that evaluation process, and then explain those trade-offs to decision makers. So the evaluation of data sources is something we've seen a lot in presentations throughout this conference so far, and even the explanation and communication aspect of what we're tasked to do as applied demography experts. So, and usually we're interacting with decision makers, that can be different in all kinds of fields, but they're trying to make difficult, high impact choices. They often have limited information or limited understanding of the technical components of the choices they're making. So they tend to have an unlimited demand for information. And oftentimes, has been my experience, is that these decision makers value timely information over any other data source trait. So I'll talk through a bunch of traits that I've listed out through what I've experienced so far. But the timeliness is the easiest one for most decision makers to understand, which can pose some problems for us. And another, just kind of setting the stage here, is there are many, many new data sets emerging. So I tagged 2006 here because this one paper that I found that talked about the emergence of cloud computing was really taking off in 2006. The term was first coined in 1996, but essentially for many businesses, governments, nonprofits, et cetera, data collection, storage, and processing has become very efficient and inexpensive with this cloud and advanced IT tools. So now a lot of organizations are repurposing their administrative data for analytical purposes. So this has come up with federal government data, as well as some private sector. We've heard about cell phone data being repurposed, water utilities being repurposed, and so on and so forth. So suddenly there's new revenue streams for many organizations to share that data. So the goals for today, I'll spend about 10 minutes on each of these goals. First is that hopefully you all will remember at least 5 criteria that can be used to compare data sources. Goal number 2 is that we'll talk about 3 of these criteria and how they're applied to at least 2 data sources. If you can remember that, I'll talk about many more. And then for goal number 3, I'm going to walk through some use cases to try to drive home the point that data sources are often complementary as opposed to substitutes. So when we're talking with decision makers, this distinction can often be lost, but it's an important aspect of what we do. So the agenda will follow that outline as I just stated. Comparison criteria, some data source examples, and case studies. So the full list here of criteria is on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to go down and briefly address each one. So the first one is what organization is producing the data source or the data product. So this can vary just at a basic level by federal, state, or private organizations. Each organization has their own culture, their own motivations, their own funding, and all of those factors can influence the data that you end up looking at. And I'll be using the American Community Survey, the ACS, to just kind of highlight what I mean by each one of these criteria. So the organization that produces the ACS is U.S. Census Bureau. So then the second one would be the sustainability. So this is really about making sure once you've spent time and effort in learning a data source and building software around it, that it will remain available for you to use for whatever research goals that you have. So some data sources can have more trend breaks than others. And sometimes data sources entirely can be retired. So either a law expires that was producing the data product, there could be low demand for the data product, or there could be a high cost associated with producing the data product from that organization. So, in thinking about the ACS, I consider the sustainability to be pretty high. The responses required by law, there's a lot of data users and so on and so forth. Fairly subjective, but just an opinion on that. The third one would be about data access. So the way that you're accessing data is obviously pretty crucial. If it is a pain, then you're less likely to use it. So usually you can access data through an FTP, API, or GUI format. So file transfer protocol, application programming interface, or guided user interface. And typically you're accessing PDFs, CSV files, or text files. So that can change, obviously, depending on data source. But for ACS, from what I've found, is that you can access ACS data through the US Census FTP site. I guess not so new anymore, but the Census API website, as well as the GUI, data.census.gov, that was replaced Fact Finder. And typically you're accessing CSV or JSON file formats for ACS. Fourth would be documentation. So on the documentation side, this can vary widely depending, again, all of these are kind of tied to the organization criteria, but typically you want to look for a data user guide. So Population Reference Bureau has an excellent one for the ACS if you have not already seen that before. But you'll also want to look out for documentation around cleaning procedures associated with the data, any imputation for missing data that may be occurring, any weighting that's done, especially if you're looking at sample-based data, as well as how the data is collected. And if you are not able to find these pieces of documentation, that should be a kind of a red flag for you all when it comes to transparency that the organization is providing around that data source. So the ACS has a lot of online archives available on Census Bureau's website, and the ACS Data Users Group as another plug. If somebody can put in the chat for me some references to Population Reference Bureau, that would maybe be helpful for others as well. So the next criteria would be about ethical collection of the data. So specifically talking about informed consent, and also default opt-out strategies, as well as collecting data in multiple languages to ensure inclusivity. So the informed consent, I'll talk about some data sources that have more passive collection where we may not know that you're in the data set, but someone is using your data for analytical purposes. So just something to keep in mind, especially as more privacy regulations are rolled out. The default opt-out, is typically that whatever default option is available in collection is typically going to be the most popular, as I think we have all experienced in several Census Bureau research presentations. So if there's a default opt-in, then you're going to be included in the collection until you manually tell somebody, please do not include me in this anymore. So and for ACS, the respondents are clearly informed. And just to throw in a little provocative statement here of whether or not the ACS is voluntary, given that the response is required by law. Just an interesting conceptual point that we can debate about later. Next criteria about ethical storage. So this is something I've been learning a lot more in experience with Trellance and working with credit union and financial institution data is the storage is incredibly important. So that comes to the data deletion practices of once it's collected, how long will the organization hold the data for? This can also impact how much history of data is available if you need a lot of history for your research goal. There's also such thing as a SOC 2 Type 2 security certificate that, as I have been learning, is the highest standard of security related to storing and working with data. So that's usually a good sign if the organization has that kind of criteria, as well as durability of the data. So saying that there's backups with the data, the data is hosted in multiple different geographies throughout the country or throughout the world. So if there's a hurricane in one place and the servers go down, that you can still have access, and that the data there is durable. So for the ACS, saying here that it's secure yet available, kind of a subjective opinion on that. And differential privacy definitely starts getting into this kind of topic here. So the next one, talking about ethical usage. So, trying to ensure that the data and research associated with that data is transparent, reproducible, that there's some kind of independent oversight associated with the data source or the organization is usually another good sign when you're trying to compare data sources. And I just threw in this kind of not predictive policing use case. I think this has been a pretty famous use case, kind of the pitfalls of AI without understanding the impacts here. So, and I think another important one is anonymity of the people that you're collecting the data from when you're using it. So there's a lot of aggregation by geography or suppression, that the Census Bureau does and things such as that. So, the ACS considering this kind of a high rating, it's used for allocating government funds, as well as a pretty solid base of socioeconomic truth. Even though limitations exist, I think it's definitely considered a standard for our industry. So the next one being topic and granularity. So however you're operationalizing a topic and the granularity that's available. So this can be looking at aggregated breaks that could be 5-year age groupings up to maybe you only have 3 age groupings. And especially having access to microdata is usually very helpful because you have a lot more flexibility with data. And this is, I'm talking about the data width and length, so to speak. So how many columns and how many rows are available there. So for the ACS, some topics are better than others. I've heard some weaknesses about some of the income related information on ACS, but we've heard a lot about the strengths in comparing two geographies based off of race and ethnic composition between two geographies there. So that's a good advantage, as well as the Puma data that's available in the microdata. So the public use micro area geography. So the cost is definitely a big one here, especially if you're looking at using private sector data. So, a lot of the public data that we're working with is free, which is fantastic. If you're looking to purchase data, typically from what I've seen, there's a usage license that may be annually or monthly to pay for unlimited access to the data. Or if you're hitting an API, this is common with, and I've heard references to like Google Maps API as an example, you'll be charged per call or per hit to the API. So for ACS, nearly everything is free. And I just threw in here, they do have some fees for special tabulations when you're have a more advanced research question that you'd like to look at, but just about everything is free. Next, unit of analysis. So this can be, are we looking at persons, households, addresses, businesses for firmographic data, transactions, that really runs the gamut, just, making sure that you're aware of, what each record or each row represents in the data source that you're looking at. And then for the ACS, they have available persons and housing units in the PUMS data files, as well as geography in the aggregated or tabulated data. So next, sample or account. And this is a big one that I'll talk about a little bit more, but essentially just making sure that you have an understanding when the data is being collected. Is it coming from a sample? And then, that begs the question of a lot more lines of questions around, how did you sample that? What's your frame? Are you stratifying? Are you randomly selecting sample records? Is it a convenient sample? Or are you looking at a count that's more of a census effort that can be more similar to like the decennial census, or a count of administrative records? And for the ACS, to put it very simply, and others can comment more in depthly, it being a stratified random sample of U.S. households by U.S. Census geographies and down to the block level. So. Record size here. So just how many units of analysis are in the data set? What's your N? So pretty simple, but some data sources may have every criteria you'd like, and then they just do not have a large enough N, a large enough record size to be useful to you. So for the ACS, 3.2 million addresses annually in their record size, and that decreases as you're using different data sources like the PUMS that will be a sample of those addresses. Next being geographic coverage. Fairly self-explanatory, but are you looking at the entire world globally, just North America, just the United States, county, for Puerto Rico, municipios, for Louisiana, for parishes, and for other countries looking at provinces, regions, and we've heard a little bit about school districts or congressional districts. So pretty important to know what geography your data source is eyeing there. And for the ACS, following the United States Census geography hierarchy down to the block group. Then collection method. So breaking out here into active and passive. So for active, some examples being, over the phone, CAD from Census, a computer-assisted telephone interview, or paper form or online form. And then for passive collection methods, this can be that you may have an active component in downloading a mobile app, but then the mobile app is constantly screening or collecting your activity throughout the day. For transactions, you're typically not necessarily providing consent to for someone else to use transaction data, but it's collected passively every time you swipe a credit card or things like that. Also can be like TV viewing, and it's getting even more popular now with innovations with automakers. So Tesla using your driving data to improve, their products. So those are passive collection methods. So for ACS, all of them being active, as it's very well-informed consent. So phone, paper, online, and in-person interviews. Timeliness. So being updated annually, quarterly, monthly, so on and so forth, and ACS being annual. So hopefully most of you on the call already have a lot of experience with those, and you'll remember at least 5 by the end of the talk. So for data sources, I'm going to walk through several data sources and focus in on these 3 criteria that deal with geography. So as the border, shape, as the cost, and the fill color as being a survey or census. So looking at transportation, I've tagged here Teralytics and Bureau of Transportation Statistics air traffic volume. Both of these have a border of yellow, so they're available at local or national geography. The shape is different, so Bureau of Transportation Statistics data is free. However, Teralytics is a private provider of mobile phone migration data. And Kyle Castle actually put in a chat in an earlier session when Ethan Sheridan was speaking about cell phone data that Teralytics partners with telecom providers to determine migration patterns from mobile phones. They have an interesting article to deal with Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria that I'll talk about a little bit as well. And both of these consider more census or count oriented. So a count of mobile phones or a count of passengers coming from airlines. So for labor market, so having here Bureau of Labor Statistics, current population survey, and the JOLT survey. The IRS, producing statistics of income, as well as Burning Glass, that does some interesting analysis on job postings that I actually learned about from a COPAFS meeting. So for the border here, they all have yellow, so available nationally and locally. For the shape, the BLS and IRS being circles, so they're free, and Burning Glass being a rectangle, it costs money. And the fill, they're all, the BLS being surveys, so current population survey and JOLT survey, IRS based off of tax returns, so that considering more of a count, and job postings from Burning Glass, consider that more of a count of job postings from like web scraping. On the demographic side of things, so American Community Survey and Decennial Census, both from the Census Bureau, both available nationally and locally, both circles, so both free, and American Community Survey being a survey and the Decennial Census being a census. So for media, this was prior to joining Trellance. I worked at Nielsen, so have a little bit of background here. Nielsen being available national or local, so border of yellow, and some media companies, that your cable providers, internet providers that have set-top box data or DVR data, primarily being available locally. Both of these being in media, not a whole lot of free data there. So both of these cost money. And for the fill, Nielsen with their TV panels, primarily using survey methodology, and on the provider, the set-top box provider side, more of a count of how many DVRs or how many set-top boxes exist. Both provide information on viewing behavior. On the financial side, more of what I'm getting into as of late with Trellance and credit unions. I have the National Credit Union Administration, local to the Tampa area where I'm based, Suncoast Credit Union, as well as MasterCard, so a credit card provider. So the National Credit Union Administration is similar to the FDIC for banks, and all credit unions are required to produce what's called annual call reports to describe their financial holdings and performance throughout the year. And for Suncoast Credit Union, something that Trellance is working through is being able to use instantaneous transactional data coming from credit unions for analytics back to the credit union. And then interestingly, for those same transactions, MasterCard also has information on the exact same transaction, so long as the card that was used to create the transaction was issued by MasterCard. So a competitor there would be Visa, where the credit union would have MasterCard and Visa, but MasterCard obviously would only have the MasterCard transactions there. So Here on the border, the NCUA data available locally and nationally for call reports. MasterCard data has available data nationally and locally. Suncoast data would only be local, so specific to the transactions that happened with Suncoast. For the shape, if you want to use Suncoast Credit Union data, they don't currently sell it out. You should maybe talk with me if you're interested in doing that, but there would likely be a charge associated there. MasterCard certainly charges, and the call reports are free. And for the fill, all being more census or count enumerations. For education, I have listed here National Center for Education Statistics coming from the federal government, as well as an example of a state education department, so Florida Department of Education. So prior to Nielsen, I had worked with the Florida State Legislature on helping them forecast public school enrollments, which made great use of the Florida Department of Education data. So a little bit of background with that. So the borders here coming from the state level education enrollment is available only locally. There is no national, that's just the state level. And from the federal side, available nationally or locally because they're collecting data from more than one state. For the border, they are both circles, so they're both free. The NTS data is, from my experience, a little easier to work with, but can lag behind in the frequency of updates. The Department of Education data is updated more frequently, but a little bit more difficult to access. And for the fill, considering both of these as more counts and census kind of enrollments, it's typically you're looking at students with classified as an FTE or a full-time equivalent student. So they break up students based off of the cost of educating that student for various reasons. So hopefully you all can remember with this full picture, there's many data sources here. So at the end of the talk, goal number 2 here, 3 criteria from 2 of these sources. So for the case studies, the first one here is looking at trying to evaluate migration and the impact on population in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. So I had a pretty successful collaboration with Alexis Santos, Mario Marazzi, and Matt Canishero around trying to figure this out. And several other researchers have some great natural disaster or disaster of demography information here, just like Ethan was sharing in a prior session. So we were looking at the Puerto Rico Community Survey on the left most column, that PRCS, as well as the Bureau of Transportation Statistics air traffic volume in the center, as well as on the far right. We didn't actually analyze this, but this came up in conversation about mobile migration data coming from something like Teralytics. And the example that Kyle Castle shared with Esri was for Houston and Hurricane Harvey. So definitely some value with that data source there. So I just go through here and pick out some of the criteria. I won't walk through all of them, but show examples of for this case study, if you're trying to understand what's the impact of Hurricane Maria or natural disaster on any geography, taking this case study as Puerto Rico here, each of these data sources provide a different window to what's happening to the population. And some of the signals overlap from each of these data sources, but not entirely. And ideally, if there's no cost constraints or time constraints, as researchers, to understand the widest scope of what's happening to the population here after a disaster, you would want to use all of these data sources. So Stan Smith also has some great information and guidance on this kind of disaster demography that we used in the paper that we worked on for Puerto Rico, that also highlights even other data sources related to understanding population movement after a disaster. Yeah, I'll leave that at that. Leave this at that. If anyone has more questions or would like to talk about this further, I'd be happy to. So the next case study coming from my time at Nielsen in talking about trying to understand what media or what kind of television viewing behavior people are watching, and then trying to convert that into ratings for pricing out the value of advertising. So, the three data sources I have here are the Nielsen Television Audience Measurement Panel, so the TAM product from Nielsen. In the left side of this table, the center being the set-top box data that I had mentioned earlier. So this is administrative records being repurposed from the likes of Comcast, Charter, Dish, DirecTV, etc. And then on the far right side, getting into more what streaming looks like on television sets. So, I have an example here of Vizio, but it does not have to be specific to Vizio. One of the newest innovations when it comes to understanding viewing behavior is the fact that the screen is getting larger and somewhat kind of less important which screen you're viewing, because you can watch the same content on many different size screens in many different locations now. So this kind of smart TV or streaming blends into more of what's called a digital ad ratings product, but is another perspective on viewing. So the TAM panel, has a very sophisticated sampling strategy associated to ensure representation of various demographic groups and geographies. The set-top box data is only available if a person signs up for that given service. If they're not for that service, then you don't have data on them. So there can be a lot of bias associated with that. But there's a really high sample size with set-top box data and even with the smart TV data. So you get a lot more reliable estimates. They just may not be as valid. So there's value there. It just needs to be, kind of balanced a little bit. And the smart TV data, has even a different, perspective on the viewing. And, again, ideally, if you have no cost constraints and no time constraints and all the sophistication on software and IT, then you can blend all of these together and you'll get the best picture, of viewing behavior. You'll be able to get set-top box data from every provider that ever exists, any streaming data from every provider out there, and so on. And for the last case study here, before I turn it over to any questions, in the chat, is looking at the decennial census quality. So this is something that has come up several times at this conference, and I think it's a really great way to communicate this idea that data sources are, typically complements and not substitutes. If data sources were substitutes, we'd be, copying, our efforts, duplicating our efforts, which, oftentimes is not an efficient use of resources. So for the decennial census, they're creating, an enumeration or a count of the United States, population and housing units. And then to check the accuracy on that, also implementing this post-enumeration survey strategy that takes into account a follow-up of folks included in the decennial census that should provide a measure of quality and an understanding of over or under counts associated with the decennial census. And lastly, the demographic analysis method. So this is the dual method approach that's referred to by census, where they're modeling the population using a lot of the same data sources and methods as the annual population estimates program, but doing it in a limited in a more limited way specific to decennial census quality. So, and just calling out that DA actually made this mistake earlier. DA is definitely different from the population estimates annual post-census estimate. So similar data, similar methodology, but they are different. So with that, that is all of the material I have for you today. So we have about 10 minutes for questions if anybody would like to share. I've seen some good back and forth going on in the chat, and yeah, hopefully you all are able to take away from all three of these goals, but be able to name at least 5 of the criteria that I mentioned that many of us are using on a daily basis. How 3 of those criteria pair to at least 2 data sources, and why data sources are often complementary instead of substitutes. So that concludes my talk. I'll go through and look at the chat to see if there are any questions. And Sarah, if I missed any, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so a lot of the discussion that's happened so far in the chat, Colin, has been related to data.census.gov and how it is not the most user-friendly. So I don't know if you want to speak at all about that, and just challenges to accessing data in general.
Yeah, so as a preference on accessing census data, I usually advocate for building software around the Census API. There's a fair amount of data, although definitely not all data available on the API. And I think that's some of the limitations with data.census.gov too, is that I think not all of the data is available there yet. But I think from more of a developer perspective, and typically what I've seen, at least with Nielsen and with Trellance, who have more sophisticated IT resources, the API is the way to go. So, and shying away from the GUIs, the guided user interface in general, because it's much more manual. So that's probably, I guess, what I would say on that. I've to be perfectly honest, miss, I think, some of the procedural documents that have lasted for a long time with FactFinder. You just know where everything is, and it's a pain to learn something new, and especially that kind of goes back to this sustainability criteria. If you're going to change some data sources or change the way you're accessing, you build out an infrastructure and a process around that data source and that kind of data portal, and it changes. So now all this work that you built up that you've been reusing suddenly falls on your shoulders with all the regular day-to-day work that you also have. So yeah, maybe not too much of a straight answer, but hopefully that helps frame any of the discussion, or talk, speak a little bit more to the discussion that's happening. And yes, I see the comment from Susan. Yes, I will post a link to the paper, with Stan Smith. So, and actually, Alexis, I don't know if you're in here, but if you could help me out with that, that would be great. If not, I'll get that to you, Susan. So I guess, with only a couple more minutes left, I'll throw in another tidbit here that, when I was looking at the criteria, a lot of this mindset of trying to list all these elements out came from a side project at Nielsen with a couple of coworkers, Elaine Perrin, Scott Adams, and Lauren Lombardo. And we were trying to, get ahead of all of these questions that we were having, where the quality or the methods of the television panels or any other products panels were being challenged, and clients trying to get us to use more data sources and newer data sources because it looks more innovative. So that was kind of the inspiration behind trying to list all of these sources out. And one of the things that we wanted to do but didn't end up doing, and maybe this can be something others on the call can collaborate on, and happy to be talk more about it, is trying to come up with more of like a quantitative index around comparing data sources. I think it's a pretty lofty goal, but being able to score and rank data sources against one another, so long as there's enough commonality. It kind of having that ranking system, I think, goes in the face of that last goal that I have, where data sources are complementary, not substitutes. So if you're ranking, it gives it more of a substitute mindset. But anyway, it's just, I guess, throwing that out to fill up the last couple of minutes if anyone's interested. Well, I think if there are no other questions, maybe Sarah, we can give folks a few minutes back. And I know that we have great list of presentations coming up. So I believe we have a 15-minute break there. So I want to say 1:30. So the start of the next round of the presentations. And as usual, throw in more plugs for the conference on your social media channels. The hashtag ADC 2021. So we can spread the conference.
Colin, thank you for your presentation. It was really great, and certainly something I deal with every day. So it's fun to sort of hear about it from someone else. I will just remind everyone the next session is actually our sort of small group table discussions. And I believe those are all listed in the sessions. So Danielle's email said each of those are capped at 15 participants. So, you can move around, join one discussion for a little while and then leave and then join another topic. But I think there will be some good discussions based on how the discussions have gone sort of in the chats and how the networking event worked on the first day. So look forward to that. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.